So Daisy, as you all know, is of course a writer, a translator, and an artist. She's very well known for the fact that she translated Tomb of Sand, which won the International Booker a few years ago. And I think when she was asked about the act of translation, you had a very good metaphor, and you described it as two ballroom dancers. And you'd said it was Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. So if that's the act of translation, what's the act of writing fiction?
That's a great question. We agreed we would surprise each other, so we haven't pre-gamed our conversation at all. And thank you just in advance for reading my book, and thank you to the festival for having me. So if translation is a pair of ballroom dancers, and I said that Fred Astaire was the author and Ginger Rogers was the translator, that means that when I write a novel, I'm Fred Astaire, obviously. So you're doing choreographing and you're doing the dance, but you're not the one that has to rethink the whole text the way a translator does or Ginger Rogers does.
So Alice Sees Ghosts, like the title tells us, is about a character who sees friendly ghosts mostly. And she is this young woman, and it's also a love story. She meets a psychiatrist called Ronith, and then, will they, won't they, is kind of leads us through the entire novel. I think you've spoken about how your mother actually kind of believed in the other world. So can we talk a little bit about your own sort of, before we talk about the novel, but your own initiation into this world that we cannot see, but which many of us believe in?
Yeah, so when the book first was publicized, many people said to me, "Oh, I didn't expect you to write speculative fiction, to write horror." And I said, "Well, I didn't think that I had written speculative fiction." And so one friend said, "Well, then what did you write?" Good question. And I said, "I think of it as realism because I was brought up to believe in ghosts. And I have one particular memory. My maternal grandmother was killed in a horrible way when I was about 3, and I started to become very fearful at night. And I remember one night I was lying in bed, and my mother said good night to me, and I told her I was afraid of ghosts, and she said, "Well, you don't need to be afraid of ghosts because if they show up, there's just something that they want to get done, and then you do it for them, and then they'll be fine." And so I think that was meant to calm me down, but it terrified me, and I had to sleep with the lights on for years after that. And by the way, my grandmother actually is said to have returned as a ghost. Like she was, the real estate agent was selling her house, which was on a farm, and the real estate agent knew her well, and she was walking across a field with a couple who was interested in buying the house. And she says that my grandmother appeared side saddle in riding habit on a horse and waved like this, and the couple ran away because she didn't want, what everyone said is she didn't want a childless couple to buy the house. She wanted it to be a family. So they didn't buy the house. So that's the backdrop.
But have you seen any ghosts yourself?
I personally haven't. My mother died herself a few years ago, and she absolutely promised that she would be back. And I don't think anyone's seen her, but of course you can feel her. So more than actual apparitions, I think many of us have probably felt the presence of ghosts.
So the two main characters in the book, Alice and her partner, he's a psychiatrist, he's a man of science. And I think there's a point where his mother says, oh, he's a man of science and he doesn't believe in things like the supernatural, but us poets are more romantic and we tend to be more believing. So do you think that's true? Do you think that artists and writers kind of believe in this other world where there are kind of ghost people and non-ghost people?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I think there's a sort of artists and writers and poets are more open to unusual things in general. So, alternative narratives, the supernatural, astrology, palmistry, the occult, alien abductions. My own father is an artist and he believes in the afterlife and alien abductions and reads about them all the time and gets very irritated if you say that you're not so sure about people getting dragged off in spaceships. So, whereas, people of science they've been trained to only believe in the sort of the observable and the measurable world, so they tend to be less open to these things.
When you were writing this novel, were you trying to kind of create a balance between those two, those who might believe and those who might not? So the book appeals to all readers?
Well, I wasn't really thinking about appealing to readers in that sense, as much as just the tension that exists among people, among families, of, if somebody believes in something really out there, does everyone else go along or do they pull them back? And as you know, Ronit is not at all into this, but then it turns into an excuse to bring his fiance to India to meet his parents, and she had been unwilling to before. So he ended up having to go along with it, even though he's very opposed to allowing her mind to wander.
Alice Sees Ghosts is, of course, also a family story, and there's a complicated relationship between Alice and her mother. Her mother has a series of problems, and one of them is alcoholism. And I think there's this very sort of poignant moment towards the end when Alice has to kind of become the keeper of her mother. She has to take care of her mother. Can we talk a little bit about creating that relationship and just how easy or difficult was it to write?
It was an upsetting relationship because the mother is just not capable of being the adult in the relationship, and she's also a very destructive force. And so, in some ways, the one of the kind of underlying features of the book is that the ghosts aren't just the dead people, right? Like, so the mother kind of haunts the family house as a living person, but who is just not functioning at all as a living person. So I think that was an important and difficult relationship to write about. And I've seen it also this a lot in my own family of kind of the haunting of the living, of people that become sort of shells due to psychological trauma and things like that. And they're not quite functioning and they're not quite there at all. And I found it very kind of cathartic to write about that because I've seen so many relationships like that.
That actually brings me to the next question about how in this novel, I think the reader gets the sense that the ghosts aren't always the dead people. The haunting is being done actually by the living as well. So can we just talk a little bit about that, about how the living can be both the haunting and the haunted?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think what I just said, like that some people are kind of hollowed out of their personalities and their lives. And so there's actually a scene where the mother is acting like a poltergeist, just kind of running through the house, opening doors, and there's areas of the house that she's kind of ransacked like a poltergeist, and her presence is often felt in her absence, like you find empty liquor bottles rolling around. And so this is, also true of people that have severe substance abuse problems, is that they are kind of in some ways no longer among the living, and they make life much more difficult than dead people do.
And Alice herself is a bit ghost-like. I think at some point, in fact, even Ronit describes her as Ophelia, right? Because she is this waif and she's just, sort of not eating, and she's essentially also unhappy, at least for the start of the novel. So we talk about her character and how she's also ghostly in her own sense.
Yeah, I think part of the narrative is about how families, and this is not a family that suffered from trauma like war or anything like that. This is the trauma is entirely kind of self-inflicted in some ways of aristocratic people who keep secrets and damage one another over progressive generations. So Alice is, a product of this world, and she's barely educated, and she's lived in this kind of this country home in the family. A lot of the time, she probably was homeschooled a bit, and um, so in a way, she isn't all there. She hasn't really engaged with society very much, and that makes her, of course, she's all the book. The house is full of very old books, so she only reads old books. So in some ways, she's not of this world herself, and feels an immediate connection to the other world and has strange dreams and things like that.
Talking about Alice, I think it is Ronit's mom who actually makes the observation that, oh, she isn't that educated. Maybe once she comes to India, we can like enroll her in university, etc. Can we talk about creating that Indian family scenario? Because of course, this book comes to India briefly. There's an interlude where Alice is trying to find her family secrets. She's trying to find her grandfather. Does she know who her grandfather really is? I don't want to reveal all the spoilers. But can we talk a little bit about creating the Indian family and also just the part that is set in India?
Yeah, I wanted to be very careful about writing about India, even though I spend a lot of time here, and there's like so much essentialization and Orientalism and everything in writing by white people about India. So I didn't want to fall into the trap. So I tried to really ground it in what I know. So like don't necessarily believe that you should always write what you know, which is what writing teachers often say. But for this part, I wrote only what I knew. And so, for example, I had a job for a long time at the University of California at Berkeley, running the Center for South Asia Studies, and we were fundraising for a Bangla language teacher. And so we spent just so much time with upper middle class Bengali donors. And I even went to India and spent time with them and in their homes and so on like that. So this was, I felt like very familiar ground for me to set it in. And also just because I was in the academic world too, so the father is a scholar, and they're not based on any specific people, but I just channeled a lot of people that I knew and things that I knew.
It's interesting also about how the geographic period is never, the time. Alice is always like, she doesn't want to discuss the news, and she's very scared of anyone asking her about the news. But there are also all these events happening, and I think Ronit is kind of more tuned into that. So, can we talk a little bit about that distancing that she has from sort of contemporary affairs, and why you chose to do that with her?
Well, she's like I said, she grew up mostly in this family house that's been owned for generations, and it's just completely full of these old books and old kind of objects that people collected over the years, and so she's really not of the present at all. She barely. I think this is set. We can think of this as around 2002 or something like that. But she's barely aware of the internet, and she doesn't have a cell phone yet. And so she just relies on everybody, like relies on Rona basically to make a plane reservation, or she's just not of this era. She's living in some kind of past place, and she dreams that she's at her grandparents' house when they were young people, and so she dreams about that every night when she's in the house.
And of course, the ghosts in this book are her. I think that there is the grandfather, and she's kind of tracing this old man that she sees once in a while. And I think there's also her grandmother, who she's very close to, and then her grandmother dies and leaves everything to Alice. Can we talk about
spoiler?
Sorry. I was trying not to, but So I want to talk a little bit about the grandmother's figure because again, she's very interesting and she's like Alice, but she's also not because she's this very singular woman who's lived a difficult life and has all these secrets which we will not reveal. But she's also a very compelling sort of anchor to the entire story.
Yeah. So she's Alice's grandmother is the kind of the matriarch, and she's lying in bed dying when the story starts, and she, she's probably actually the cause of a lot of everyone else's problems because she's decided to make certain choices and impose her will on things so that she doesn't lose social status or money. So she got held on to things and shaped the world of her family in a way where many people are kept in the dark about their own identities and what's going on in their lives. So she's an interesting character because in some ways she's very sympathetic because she's this lovely woman. She's very beautiful and erudite, but she's in other ways she's kind of a tyrant.
I want to move a little bit to translation as well. And I think at one point, when you were talking about the Tomb of Sand, you described a certain passage about being like a jalebi or something like that. I don't remember the exact metaphor. And how it was so difficult for you to kind of unpack, and how Tomb of Sand was actually much thinner, the original, but then the translation became much fatter. Again, I just want to talk about the different registers we spoke about a little bit in the beginning, but about kind of translating someone else's and then writing your own, and just how different are they?
Well, one metaphor I like to use is from Robert Frost, who he was asked why did he still write in meter and rhyme when everybody else in the modernist period were writing in free verse. And he said, for me, it's like writing in free verse is like playing tennis with the net down. And so I think writing as a translator is like playing tennis with the net up, is that you have this structure that you can hold on to. And then I piggyback on that with something from Lydia Davis, who's a well-known translator and writer. And she talks about how when you're translating, you never have to face the horror of the blank page. So you always know what you have to do when you wake up in the morning, even if you don't want to do it, and sometimes you don't like doing it, you can keep doing it. So translating can be a bit of a slog, and writing your own fiction is kind of the opposite. Like, it's very free and it's wonderfully creative, but it can be scary because you could say anything you want. Whereas when I'm translating, I feel bound by so many rules that, I can't say this, I can't say that. Like, I have to work within the bounds of what the author set out for me.
A translation is also essentially collaborative, right? You've also spoken about how there's been so much back and forth between you and the writer. Do you find writing that way very solitary, or you enjoy that solitariness when it comes to writing a book?
Well, it depends on if the original writer is alive. Okay, I mean, you're collaborating, but with a ghost, when you're translating someone who's no longer with us. So yes, writing for yourself is very solitary, and sometimes in a frustrating way, because you do need other people to read what you wrote and critique, and that can be scary. And it's a little bit less scary to have someone critique your translation, because you can sort of say, well, I was limited by what I could do. But when it's your own writing, it's just, this is all your choice, and you could do whatever you wanted, and this is what you chose to do.
You're also an artist, and in fact, you have designed the cover of Tomb of Sand. I think there's this one scene in this book where Alice, I think, imagines a medieval painting, and there are these sort of demons coming out of the mouth. Was there sort of artworks that kind of you were thinking about while writing this book, or just how has art sort of made its way into your prose?
Well, I mean, my parents are both visual artists, and my grandfather was a painter, and I'm a painter, so art is like number one the way that I was brought up and my point of view and how I was raised. So I think you'll find both in my original writing and in my translation that there's a lot of visual imagery, whether it's this actual referencing an actual painting or just describing something in a very visual way.
But what are some of the challenges of sort of taking the visual and putting it onto the page?
Um, well, I mean, you just have to spend a lot of time visualizing. And I tell this to translation, like emerging translators a lot. I say, close your eyes and visualize what's happening, because sometimes when you translate, something comes out sounding ridiculous. Like often, for physical gestures or something, if you translate it literally, it sounds wrong. So you have to visualize what are they actually doing with their body, and then describe that, and it will actually be more accurate. So it's the same when it's my own writing. I just, I close my eyes, I visualize, I describe it, but like visual memory is really primary for me. So I probably start from a place of visions rather than words.
So, had you sort of doodled an Alice first before you wrote her?
Well, no, I never painted her, but I started out just imagining certain objects, like a glass that my great aunt had, with it was big glass with a pink elephant on the side, like for really large cocktails. And so I started thinking about these cocktail parties that she dreams about. So I start out with certain visual images, and then I move into the realm of words.
Sorry, I've been told I have to now open the house for questions. So if there are any questions, please raise your hand and a mic will be given to you.
Hi. We missed a part of your session, but my question was, as a translator, when you're looking at a word in any language, or say it's a ritual or something, in the world of that language, it has so many stories, meanings that people who just see the word know, what it's supposed to mean, that whole world of idea. What are the strategies a translator can use to translate without being literally so, and yet giving that world, introducing the world to a new language reader?
Well, first of all, you don't have to feel obligated to translate one word with one other word. And that's, I think, a lot of people worry a lot about that. They think, oh, if this means snow, in this language, then it has to be something that means the exact same thing in the other language. But there are lots of words that don't have one-to-one meanings, and it's not just rituals or cultural things. So every word, all words have these clouds of meaning around them. And so you have to think about that cloud and just try to make yourself as succinct as possible. But you can start out wordy. Give yourself 10 words if you need to, and then you can start to compact them and see how small you can go to convey that cloud of meaning around the word, so that a new reader will be drawn in and understand what the word means. And you can even teach it to the reader. You can use the original word and just say, like, Hanuman Puja, comma, blah, 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 comma, and keep going. So that next time the reader gets there, they know what a Hanuman Puja is.
I think when you write about ghosts, there's always a politics of the afterlife in a way. Of course, there's so much politics in who gets to be a ghost, who gets to quote unquote live in a novel. How do you deal with that as a writer? How do you navigate that politics of the afterlife?
Well, I don't think I was thinking about that actively, but I think it's really relevant. And, one thing I always notice is that a lot of people who believe in reincarnation, especially not Indians, but people outside of India, they always want to be, a reincarnation of Cleopatra or something, and it's never like a dog or a worm or something like that, or like a slave, or so they always have these lofty former selves, so it becomes very narcissistic. So there's that aspect of the afterlife, which is the reincarnation, and then And then if you think about ghosts, my ghost is actually like a privileged white male who wants to have his finances taken care of. And he's homophobic also. So I don't know what the politics is of that, but it sort of almost makes it seem like there's unfairness in the afterlife too, that that such people get to remanifest and get their business taken care of.
Thanks for that question. Any other questions? I think we have maybe just time for one more.
I just want to point out, I would like to know an experience about how difficult, how have you been, is there a incident that you have felt that is very difficult to be put into words while translating anything?
Well, there's always something, and I think translators also grow and change as they continue to translate. So something that I might have found horrendous in my first or second book would become child's play because I've decided what I want to do with all such problems, and I just take care of it. I think the hardest thing for me in translating Gitanjali Shri, since I'm currently doing a book of her short stories, is there's a huge amount of ambiguity. So you can't tell, Hindi allows for you to not have a subject of the sentence. And so sometimes you can't tell what is happening to whom, and she uses verbs in an unusual way. So sometimes it's just like this moving force field, and I have to keep trying to pin it down. Like the part about how our memories are like jalebis in Tomb of Sand. That I always say was the most difficult part of Tomb of Sin, because it was so vague, and we went back and forth like 20 or 30 times about some of those sentences. And of course, I realized at the end that people will read, if I'm successful, people will read it and they'll just like laugh and say, "Oh, that's sort of funny, haha," But at the time, it was incredibly difficult.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Daisy. Daisy's book is available, so do pick it up. And thanks, KLF, for having us.